Welcome to Home Harvest. I'm LaCretia, and today I'm going to show you how I plan my garden for the upcoming season. Right now, my entire garden is covered in snow, which honestly makes this my favorite time to plant. There's no pressure, no weeds, no planting deadlines, just time to slow down and think things through. My goal this year is to replace as much store-bought produce as I can with a 100% organic home harvest. And planning that is what makes it feel doable instead of overwhelming. So grab a notebook, get cozy, and let's plan a garden together. I started gardening in 2022, so I'm still learning, still experimenting, and still figuring things out every year. I don't have decades of experience, but planning is the one thing that's made the biggest difference for me. With one, everything feels calmer, more intentional, and honestly, just a lot more fun. Winter is when I do all of this. When spring hits, I don't want to be scrambling around trying to remember what I need to do. This year, planning matters even more because I built 13 raised beds last fall. They're completely buried in snow right now, but come spring, that's a lot more growing space I'm gonna have to manage. Expanding like that without a plan would be complete chaos, and I do best when things are organized. So everything starts on paper and then eventually my Excel spreadsheet, which I'll show you later. The first thing I do is assess the space I have. I go outside with a notebook or grid paper and make a rough sketch of the garden. Then I measure each planting area, length, width, and if it's a container, I note how deep it is and how many gallons it holds. I keep record of all this information to use every year when I'm planning my garden. This way, I don't have to remeasure unless I expand again, which will probably be this year. It's hard not to want more and more space to grow once you get started. Even if the harvest isn't as successful as I had hoped, I enjoy the process, and that's one of the main reasons I continue to do it. I also pay attention to sun exposure. If you don't know where south is in your garden, winter is a great time to figure that out. You can use a compass or a phone app. I'm in the northern hemisphere, so a south-facing area is best for my heat-loving crops. And I always put taller plants towards the north end so they don't shade out other crops. Then I think about my goals, what we eat the most and what I want to preserve. We're not picky, and I like to focus on crops that store good in cold rooms or freeze well. I want to use the preservation methods that take the least amount of effort. This is going to be all of your root crops like sweet potatoes, beets, turnips, rutabagas, carrots, plus my onions, potatoes, and garlic. Once I have my rough draft, measurements, and sun direction, I move on to the final layout. I use graph paper for rough drafts and Excel for my final version, but you can absolutely keep everything on paper if that works better for you. I treat each square as 1 foot, which makes spacing really simple. If a bed is 10 feet long and 1 foot wide, and I'm spacing my tomatoes 1 foot apart, I know I need 10 plants. This step has saved me from overcrowding beds, which is very easy to do when you're excited. I also keep the previous season's layout of what I planted and where, so rotating crops year to year is a lot easier. Next, I make a list of my staple crops, the things that we actually eat and that store well. It's easy to go crazy and try to grow everything at once. Trust me, I've been there. However, if you are new to gardening, I highly recommend starting with just a handful of crops. That way, it's less likely to get overwhelming and end up neglecting some of the plants. I break my list into cold season and warm season crops and plan for spring, summer, and fall harvests. I make sure to research varieties that do best in my climate. The New Hampshire and Maine extension websites are great for this, or even just talking to someone with experience in your area. These are my non-negotiables. If I have extra space, that's when I experiment. And if I don't have room, I use containers. Peppers are a great example. They take a long time to mature and a lot of space, so I no longer put them in my raised beds. For most container crops, I use 5-gallon food grade buckets from Tractor Supply or Home Depot. They also have 17-gallon food grade feed buckets at Tractor Supply for crops that need more space like potatoes. Just don't forget to put drainage holes at the bottom. For me, starting seeds makes the most sense. I grow a lot of food and buying starts in bulk adds up fast. My setup is pretty simple: trays, seed starting mix, shop lights, labels, shelving, and a balanced liquid fertilizer with low NPK, preferably around the 222 range. For seedlings, I use lights in the 5,000 to 6,500 Kelvin range with lumens 5,000 plus, which mimics daylight and works really well for leaf and stem growth. I don't overcomplicate it, it just needs to work. Also, when you're picking out shelves, keep in mind that a standard seed starting flat is 10 inches by 20 inches. That one detail saves a lot of frustration later. Now that I have my list of crops I want to grow, I figure out how much of each I can fit into my space and what I need to meet my preservation goals. For example, with onions, I want to grow enough to last a year. There are 2 adults in my house and we use about 2 onions a week. That comes out to roughly 96 onions. So I choose a storage variety that grows well in my climate and grow enough to meet that goal. If something doesn't store as long, I adjust my expectations. This way, I am less likely to grow too much and waste resources or not enough and be short of my goal. Once I have my list of seeds and I know how many of each plant I want to grow, I use my garden layout to pick their final resting place. I update my spreadsheet with everything: plant type, variety, seed company, how many plants I need, days to maturity, and any notes for starting seeds, transplanting, or fertilizing. I use my local frost dates to decide when to start seeds indoors, transplant, or direct sow. I use the Farmer's Almanac to search by zip code, then look on my local extension website to see how many weeks before or after my first or last frost date it needs to be planted. I do this instead of using the instructions on the seed packet because those are typically just a general guideline for the entire US. I also take it a step further and enter my seed starting, direct sowing, hardening off, and transplant dates into my phone calendar. I set them to repeat on the same week every year and schedule everything for Fridays. That way I have the whole weekend if I need it. Once it's set up, I don't have to think about it again. Now that I know everything I'm going to plant next season, I do an inventory check to see what I already have for seeds and supplies, then make a list of what I need to buy. This year, that included things like seed potato, peach trees, raspberries, green beans, sweet potato slips, bone meal, insect netting, shade cloth, deer fence for the peach tree, and materials for trellises that I'm making for the raspberries, tomatoes, cucumbers, and grapes. I keep everything in my spreadsheet along with estimated costs. This lets me spread purchases out over the winter instead of waiting until it comes time to complete a task and realizing I need to make a last-minute trip to the store mid-project. Last but most definitely not least is seed shopping. Now that I have done the research to determine what varieties of each crop do well in my climate, I start placing my orders as early as November, especially for things like potatoes and fruit, because it's hard to find specific varieties at big box stores and they sell out online fast. But they all schedule shipping for the best time to plant in your zone. My favorite companies to buy from are Stark Bros for organic fruit, Wood Prairie Family Farm for potatoes and sweet potato slips, Johnny Selected Seeds for garlic and seeds, and my local nursery for starts, shrubs, and organic loam compost delivery. Now, all that's left is to wait for that first indoor seed starting date. Planning like this takes the stress out of the growing season and lets me focus on what I love the most, sitting in the garden with a cup of tea and watching things grow. I'm still learning, still experimenting and adjusting every year, but having a plan makes all the difference. If onions are on your garden list, my next video will show you exactly how I start onions from seed to get strong, healthy seedlings. Make sure you're subscribed, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy gardening!